So this video is going to run through the application guidelines, so how to get dynamic tape on effectively, both to improve your technique but also to improve adhesion, so you get long wear times despite doing physical or very vigorous physical exercise, and also to prevent any adverse reactions from occurring. The application of dynamic tape is quite different to other tapes, both rigid tapes and kinesiology tapes. We are really using this to go on in that short position to give us that bungee type effect. So we're getting a lot of force going through the tissue, a lot more force. We're really gripping on and getting good purchase on those levers. So there is the potential to cause reactions on the skin. Now there are a couple of sorts of reactions that you'll generally see. The first is an allergic reaction. We don't see a lot of those, and that's to do with the adhesive generally. They will happen very, very quickly if you do see them, and if you put it on enough people, you will probably see some of these. They happen very quickly, usually within about half an hour or so as a general rule, and they'll get hot and itchy, and when you take it off, they will be that typical red, raised, angry-looking allergic reaction, and will be anywhere that has had tape over will have a reaction because it's a reaction to the glue. Don't leave it on. Please make sure that you remove it at that point, or they can become quite nasty. Now, the more common reaction that you will see is a mechanical irritation, and as I say, this is because we're using the tape to decelerate motion of the body. We're using it to pull on these levers to create deceleration and then to give us a recoil. So ultimately we have to anchor it to the skin, and that can lead to irritation. That's an application issue, it's a tension issue, and you can avoid that by applying the tape correctly, and that's what we're going to run through in a minute. But those reactions also look quite different. They generally take much longer to come on, generally somewhere between 6-8 hours up to a few days, depending on how much tension and how much force is being going through it. They won't generally be all over, as is the case with an allergic reaction. They will generally be at isolated points, usually on the end or somewhere near the end, or where you've turned the corner or where there's been too much tension being generated. And they generally look a little bit more like they'll start off just a redness around the end and then a blister if it's left on long enough. They often start as a hypersensitivity, just feels like an increased sensitivity, and then as you let that progress, it turns into more like a stinging as we're getting this incipient blister. Also a bit of an itchiness as well, but it then develops into a bit of a stinging sensation as this blister is developing. As I say, generally will come on much later. It takes some time for that shearing of the tape on the skin to create that skin to break down. So the allergic ones will happen quickly, they will be all over, they'll be red and raised and hot and itchy. The mechanical ones take much longer, 6, 8, 10 hours up to a couple of days, generally only on the ends, generally more of an irritation, a sensitivity and itchiness and then a stinging, and they will look more like a blister when they're removed. So we'll go through now how to get the tape on correctly so that we reduce the incidence of those blisters and that we get good adhesion. Now the glue was originally developed that if you got it right, the application right, they would stay on very well. If you got it wrong, it was designed to let go so that we reduced the incidence of those blisters so it didn't hang on and create a reaction when you had the application incorrect. So if you find that the ends are lifting regularly, it's probably to do with your application, and we're going to go through that in just a minute. And that comes down to having good anchor points, not overstretching the tape and not shortening them up too much or having it resist before you want it to be resisting. Now, you will find that on the newer tape that we've developed, it's coming out, the newer batches of tape that are coming out, that the glue is in fact stronger again. And you may find that it doesn't let go, so your application is more important. It's very easy to do once you know how, but you do need to follow these guidelines carefully, and you do need to warn your patients with all tapes, not just dynamic tape. If they do get any itching, burning, stinging, irritation, they do need to remove it immediately to prevent the occurrence of those reactions, be it an allergic one or be it a mechanical one. So the first thing we need to make sure of is that the skin is clean and dry and free from lotions and oils. Even if somebody's put a lotion on in the morning and you're taping them up in the evening, you can tell straight away and you won't get good adhesion. So prepare the skin properly first. Generally we recommend just soap and water. You can use alcohol wipes, although sometimes that can reduce the adhesion, so if you are using those you really need to make sure that the skin is very dry afterwards. Soap and water is generally enough. If you have the adhesive spray, that's a good idea, particularly around hollow areas, around the patella, around the tendons of the hamstring or the Achilles, or if people are going into the water or straight out into the football field or something like that. With this spray, it is very, very thick. You need to give it a very good shake up first to make sure that the glue mixes well. It's also not a bad idea to store it on its cap so that when you do turn it over that the glue does mix through as well. But then give it a very good shake before you apply it. You also need to remove the hair, and for that the simplest and quickest way is just to use a set of clippers or trimmers just to take the hair off. If you are using these and you're going to purchase a set, it's not a bad idea to get a set when the head clips off. That way you can use a solution, dip that in for your infection control. Many of them have a fixed head that doesn't remove. Okay. Then round the corners of your tape. So the simplest way is just to fold that back on itself, just trim around like so, and that just stops those corners lifting and peeling quite so easily. Now you can, if it's particularly cool weather, give the skin a little bit of a warm up first, just create some friction in there. Generally not necessary, and particularly if you've used your spray you're not going to want to do that. Try to avoid touching the adhesive as much as possible, particularly on those anchor points on the end. Okay. Then, to avoid touching the back of the tape, simply create a little tear and peel that. And that way we can actually remove that backing sheet and apply the tape to the skin, but without touching the adhesive at all, and that's going to improve our adhesion as well. Now, as mentioned, our main aim is to prevent getting any reactions from those mechanical irritations or those traction blisters on the skin, and also secondly to ensure that we get good adhesion, particularly because of the amount of force that's going to be going through the tape. So when we go to apply the tape, we need to put an anchor point on the end of the, create an anchor point with the end of the tape where we have no tension at all in the tape. Now if you're used to using a kinesiology type tape, generally want to double the size of your anchor points because there's going to be a lot more force going through this tape because we're applying it in the short position and we're using it to decelerate that movement or to assist that movement back in the other direction. So generally you're looking at an anchor point of somewhere between 3 and 4 fingers width. Now also, if you're going for power bands, so a double layer, a wider piece of tape, or you're doing, say, some of the throwing type techniques where there's going to be a large length change in the tape, or the athlete or the person is going to be moving at high speed and through a large range of motion, that's also going to create more pulling and more tension on the tape, so therefore increase the length of your anchor point. Similarly, if it's an elderly person with frail skin, increase the size of that anchor point as well. Now often people get the anchor point correct, and if we just watch here, they'll stick on that last 3 or 4 fingers width or a couple of inches there without any tension, but then they go and apply their tension to the tape, and you can see there that creates this shearing through onto the skin. It's likely to create tension and an attraction blister on the skin. So once you get that anchor point on, you then need to actually hold the tape down at that point 3 or 4 fingers away, and if anything, tension the tape back in the opposite direction. So now, as I put tension on the tape, I don't get the shearing force coming through onto this anchor point. So I can hold it, now I don't get the shearing as I do if I do it without holding. Just take care though not to create an anchor point, or a tension point rather, here by having a lot of force right on that end. Remember, we only need to just take up the slack in the tape. Okay, it's not necessary to pull strongly because we're applying the tape in the short position. As long as we take it to the onset of resistance, as soon as the person goes to move, there's going to be immediate resistance and deceleration force being applied. Also, the properties of the tape do the work for us. So this is a viscoelastic material, which means it functions best in and around this elastic zone. We want it functioning in here. That's where we get that best energy absorption, and then return capacity. If we stretch it a long way, it's a bit like a memory foam pillow. It takes longer to recover. If we put a big impression in our pillow, it takes longer to come back. If we have a small impression, it recovers quickly. So we want it functioning in here to absorb load and return it. We're not trying to be restrictive or tight. It's not the aim of this tape. Also, because it's viscoelastic, it means the stiffness is dependent on the rate of strain. So in other words, the faster I stretch the tape, the more resistance I get. So if I go slowly, there's a certain amount of resistance. If I speed it up, it becomes much tighter, much stiffer. So if people are moving at speed, walking, running, jumping, throwing, they will get more resistance purely because of the nature of the fabric. It's not necessary to try and overstretch the tape to get that resistance. If you feel like you still need more, perhaps it's a large person or they're doing a jumping activity where there's a lot of force going through, then you need to look at going for a wider tape or a double layer or a second strip in parallel to give you that extra force. Okay, so when we come to apply, we're going to put our anchor point on without any tension. Hold that anchor point down, just take up the slack in the tape and then smooth it down, making sure that we leave a nice anchor point at the other end as well without any tension. Now if we were doing this for the quadriceps mechanism, notice I haven't just finished on the tibial tuberosity. I want to start well away from my fulcrum so it leaves me room to have that nice anchor point at both ends. But I'm also now exerting my force further away from the axis of rotation or from the fulcrum, so it gives me a longer lever arm, so I can generate more torque out of the same force. So we'll get a more effective technique, it will stay on better, and it's not going to cause a reaction from pulling on those skin too much. If I finish here, I'm trying to anchor and generate force in the same spot, so it's going to either pull off to prevent a blister, or it's going to manage to hang on and actually give me a reaction there. Now once the tape is on, very important for the adhesion is to hold the tape down, particularly at the ends or any of those hollow areas or areas where tape is likely to come off. And when you hold it down, you need to hold for around 30 seconds to a minute. The longer you hold it, the better the application will stay. Once you've held that down for a good 30 seconds to a minute, you then can come in and give the whole thing a good rub to generate some heat and some friction to activate that glue. Just watch in doing that you don't rip up the end as you do it. So always push away over the end if you're going to rub across the end. But as I say, pressing and holding is by far the most effective thing on those areas where the tape is likely to come off. So particularly the anchor points, anywhere where we would cross a tape, also hold that very, very well. Now if you are crossing a tape, suppose we wanted to do a soft tissue unloading technique through here to gather up all of that soft tissue, we can simply round our corners once again. Now as we would come in here, it's not a bad idea to give a light spray over the back of this first layer. So just lightly, doesn't need to be big, just a light spray. You don't want the tape to be soaking wet, just until it goes a little bit tacky. And then we can apply our unloading strip. So here we will start. And whenever you're crossing the tape, start on skin and finish on skin. Because of this strong elastic recoil, if you start one piece on another piece, it's going to want to shear off it. Even overlapping lengthways, we wouldn't overlap the tape like you would with a rigid athletic tape because you're going to have different degrees of elasticity. It's going to want to shear off itself. So try to avoid overlapping the tape. Certainly don't start or finish the tape on another piece of tape. If you are going to overlap it, do it before you apply it. So create a power band by overlapping 100%, one piece on the other, and then put it on as one strong piece of tape. Don't put one piece on and then try and overlap it with another one. The only exception to that is if you're using a cover strip over your power band where you would be putting a wider tape over, and in that case it can anchor to skin all the way around. So that's acceptable, but don't put the same width of tape over itself. So now we're going to bring in our unloading, so we would go perpendicular, we've let that go tacky, we can lift up all of this soft tissue, box it all up, hold our anchor down once again, finish there with a nice anchor at this end as well. Now once again, hold that particularly on those ends for a good 30 seconds to a minute, and then also where it's overlapping, again hold for a good 30 seconds or so. Make sure that you warn your patient if they get any itching, burning, stinging, irritation, or a deterioration in their symptoms. They may be at risk of getting a reaction, and to remove the tape immediately. Now, when you do go to remove the tape, it's important, don't pull up on the tape. That puts a lot of tension on the skin, so we don't want to lift up. You can even see there, if I lift up, we get a lot of pulling on the skin. It's not only is it uncomfortable, but it's also more likely to create trauma. We can see there if we pull up. So what we need to do is hold the skin down and peel the tape back along itself. Same here, and generally go with the line of hair, not against it, even if you've removed the hair as you would. So hold down, don't lift up. That puts more tension on the skin. We want to peel back along itself. In little short, sharp increments. Don't start at one end and do a big strong rip. Again, that's likely to take some skin with it. So nice, short, sharp ones to remove the tape. So just to recap, clean, dry skin, remove the hair. When we apply, nice large anchor points that have no tension on them. Hold that anchor point down, that's most important, so that when we take up the slack, we're not stretching strongly, we're just taking up the slack. There's no tension being transmitted to this end point. Hold that down, take up the slack, smooth it down. If you can, it's always best to try and take up the tension across the length of the tape as you apply it, so that you're not doing small amounts at once. Again, you'll end up with little tension points. So where possible, anchor, take up the slack along the length of the tape, and then simply lay it down, and then apply the other end without any tension. Hold it down very, very well for that optimal adhesion. Give it a good rub, and then warn your patient if they get any reaction to remove it. Do not leave it on if they are starting to experience itching, burning, stinging, irritation that doesn't go away fairly quickly.